Hey, tonight we're diving into something a little terrifying but totally fascinating. We're talking about the times the world almost ended. Not in a movie, not in some ancient myth, but for real. From near-miss nuclear wars to asteroid flybys that came way too close, history is full of moments where everything could have gone dark, permanently. You might think you know how close we've come, but trust me, some of these stories will keep you up tonight. If you're into this kind of late-night journey through the strange and unsettling, drop a like or hit subscribe. It really helps keep this going. And hey, I always love knowing where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's build this little global campfire together. Now turn down the lights. Maybe wrap yourself in a blanket. And let's settle in. Because tonight, we're walking the edge of oblivion and learning just how many times we almost fell in. On the morning of August 27th, 1883, the Earth screamed. It happened in the Sunda Strait, between the Indonesian islands of Java and Sumatra. A volcanic island named Krakatoa, which had been rumbling for months, like a stomach warning of something awful finally let go. And when it did, it wasn't just a bang. It was the bang. The kind that shakes the corners of the world and gets written down in history books with numbers that barely make sense. The explosion was heard nearly 30 miles away, in Perth, Australia, in Rodrigues Island near Mauritius. In Sri Lanka, people thought it was cannon fire. Others thought it was God. The blast was so loud that sailors 40 miles away had their eardrums ruptured instantly, blood running down their necks as the sky turned to smoke. For reference, a typical jet engine runs at about 140 decibels. The Krakatoa eruption registered around 310. That's not just loud, that's physically impossible by modern standards. Sound doesn't usually do that, but Krakatoa did. The island itself didn't just explode, it disappeared, blown apart by a force roughly 0 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Entire sections of land vanished into the sea. The ocean rushed in to fill the crater left behind, but not before the eruption triggered a series of tsunamis that rolled across the region with devastating speed. Waves reached heights of 120 feet. Entire coastal villages were erased. An estimated 36 people died, but the real number was likely much higher. And the ones who survived, they didn't forget, because the air stayed black for days. Krakatoa didn't just damage the land, it messed with the sky. Ash and sulfur dioxide launched 15 miles into the atmosphere, so high and so thoroughly that it circled the globe. For months after the eruption, the sunsets were unreal, vivid, blood red and orange and purple in places as far away as New York and London. Artists painted skies that seemed like fantasy, and yet they were just recording what they saw. It looked like the end of the world, and in a way, it kind of was. In the months following the blast, global temperatures dropped by over 1 degree Celsius. It doesn't sound like much, but for the Earth, that's a fever dream. It disrupted crops. It shifted wind patterns. Some regions experienced snowfall in summer. The planet went weird for a while, sluggish, bruised, recovering. People tried to make sense of it. Some saw it as divine punishment. Others blamed science, railroads, bad omens. News traveled slowly, but when it arrived, it came with drawings, measurements, numbers, and awe. Krakatoa became one of the first truly global disasters reported in a semi-modern media environment. People read about it in newspapers while sipping tea halfway across the world, and then they looked out the window and saw the sky bleeding red. Of course, volcanoes erupt all the time. They've shaped continents, ended empires, and fertilized entire ecosystems. But Krakatoa was different. It wasn't just deadly, it was loud. It made itself heard by the world, and even now, almost 150 years later, its shockwaves are still bouncing around in history. The atmospheric pressure wave from the explosion circled the Earth not once, not twice, but 7 times. Scientists recorded it on barometers as far away as Paris and Washington, D.C. The Earth itself seemed to inhale, exhale, and shudder. The ocean trembled. Tides behaved strangely for days. Compasses spun. Livestock refused to eat. And somewhere, under all that chaos, the planet filed it all away like a scar under skin. And then, silence. What's left of Krakatoa today is Anak Krakatau, child of Krakatoa, a new island formed by ongoing eruptions starting in the 1920s. It's still active, still venting, breathing, reminding anyone who's watching that the Earth isn't done throwing tantrums. It might be sleeping now, but it never forgets how to scream. So, when you hear about volcanoes, remember this. It's not just lava and ash. It's pressure. It's time. It's history compressed into a chamber until the planet can't take it anymore. And when that moment comes, it doesn't whisper. It erupts. Krakatoa didn't end the world, but it tried, and the world still remembers. It didn't start in Spain. That's the first thing to know about the Spanish flu. It's called that because during World War I, most countries censored bad news to keep morale high. Spain, being neutral, didn't. So when the flu broke out and Spanish newspapers reported it honestly, the world pointed and said, "Ah, must be theirs." A branding error with deadly consequences. It began quietly in the spring of 1918, just another flu, people thought. Soldiers coughed in barracks, civilians sniffled in crowded cities, doctors shrugged. Then the second wave hit in the fall, and everything changed. The virus mutated into something else entirely fast, brutal, and utterly disinterested in mercy. Within months, it would become one of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history. The numbers still don't feel real. At least 50 million dead, possibly more. Some estimates go as high as 100 million. That's more than the total death toll of World War I, which was still raging during the flu's first appearance. And this virus didn't behave like the others. It didn't just prey on the old and the weak. It carved through the young and healthy, people in their 20s and 30s, the strong ones, the ones expected to survive anything. They were often the first to go. Some would wake up with a fever and be dead by nightfall, their lungs filled with fluid, their skin turned blue. Autopsies showed damage so severe it looked like they'd drowned. Cities tried to keep functioning, but how do you carry on when your hospitals are full, your gravediggers are collapsing, and your teachers are dead? Schools shut down, churches shuttered. Entire towns locked their doors and waited. Some tried to protect themselves with gauze masks. Others carried onions or garlic in their pockets. In parts of the U.S., spitting in public could get you fined or arrested. Desperate measures taken by desperate people while the virus kept moving. And it moved fast. Transport ships, rail cars, dusty roads, it didn't matter. The virus hit like a wave and vanished just as quickly. A town could be fine on Monday, overrun by Thursday, and half empty by Sunday. No time to prepare, no time to grieve. Then there were the side effects, not medical psychological. The grief soaked into everything. People didn't want to talk about it afterward. No great memorials, no statues. The trauma was too raw, too immediate, too strange. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone was tired. The war ended that same year, and the world wanted to celebrate. So the flu was quietly folded into the background of history, a footnote, despite the death toll. And yet, it shaped the modern world, the way we handle outbreaks, the way we bury the dead, the way we whisper when we hear someone cough. That fear didn't vanish. It settled in the bones of civilization, waiting. And when COVID-19 arrived a century later, the comparisons came quick. Another invisible enemy, another world asked to pause, another reminder that nature doesn't care about your schedule. But the Spanish flu had its own particular darkness. It was fast. It was cruel. It struck during a war already so grim people thought they'd run out of ways to die. Then the flu came along and said, "Hold my handkerchief." There were no vaccines, no antivirals, no coordinated global health response. Just fear, luck, and the slow burning out of a virus that had done its worst. By the end of 1919, it was mostly gone, burned through the population like a storm through a dry field. The survivors were left blinking in the sun, dazed, masked. grieving. So no, it didn't start in Spain, but it touched everywhere, and for a moment, the whole world coughed in unison, unsure if it would ever breathe again. It was October 1962, and the world was sweating through its button-up shirts. For 13 days, Earth tiptoed on the edge of total nuclear annihilation while two superpowers stared each other down like caffeinated poker players with flamethrowers under the table. It started with a few blurry photos. U-2 spy planes, flying high above Cuba, snapped images of something that looked suspiciously like Soviet missile sites under construction. Not small ones either. These were medium-range ballistic missiles capable of launching nuclear warheads that could reach most of the continental U.S. in under 10 minutes. Not ideal breakfast news. President John F. Kennedy was briefed. The pictures were real. The threat was real. And unlike the usual Cold War tension which simmered in the background like a very moody tea kettle, this was something more. The Soviet Union, under Nikita Khrushchev, had quietly placed offensive nuclear weapons just 90 miles from the Florida coast, close enough to make even calm people want to hide in their bathtubs with canned peaches. For over a week, Kennedy and his advisors debated what to do. Invade? Bomb the missile sites? Ignore it and hope the Soviets just forgot they left apocalypse machines in the Caribbean? Eventually, they settled on what they called a quarantine of Cuba naval blockade, but with softer branding. American warships lined up in the Atlantic, ready to stop any Soviet vessel carrying missile parts. The world watched and waited. TV anchors looked visibly nauseous. School children practiced duck and cover drills that wouldn't help even a little. Fallout shelters were stocked with crackers and canned meat and the nervous hope that nuclear fireballs respected basements. At any moment, it could have gone sideways, and at several points, it almost did. One Soviet submarine, the B-59, was cornered by U.S. Navy ships trying to force it to surface. What the Americans didn't know was that the sub carried a nuclear torpedo. Inside, the air was hot, the batteries were failing, and the crew had lost communication with Moscow. The captain believed war might have already started. He wanted to fire. But he needed the agreement of two other officers. One of them, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. Just no. And so, the world didn't end that day. Back in Washington, the tension was thick enough to butter toast. Kennedy exchanged letters with Khrushchev, some measured, some less so. The Soviets offered to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. Then, confusingly, they added a second demand: remove U.S. missiles from Turkey. Kennedy's team didn't know which offer was real. Were they losing their minds? Was Khrushchev? Were they all going to die? Eventually, they answered the first message and quietly agreed to the second. The U.S. publicly promised not to invade Cuba and privately agreed to remove missiles from Turkey within a few months. Khrushchev, in a letter that now reads like the email of a man avoiding a complete disaster, agreed to dismantle the Cuban sites. Crisis averted. Barely. But for 13 days, the world was one itchy trigger finger away from global vaporization. One misread radar. One rogue submarine. One man having a worse day than usual. And then, no more cities. No more stories. Just ash and echoes. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't just end peacefully. It changed the game. A hotline was established between Washington and Moscow, a direct line, so future leaders wouldn't have to rely on telegrams and guesswork when the stakes were planetary. Treaties followed, arms control talks. The beginning of a long, slow walk back from the cliff's edge. But the imprint remains, because for nearly 2 weeks in October, time stretched thin, the air felt charged, and somewhere in the back of every thinking person's mind was the quiet question: is this how it ends? It didn't, but it came close. In July of 2012, the sun fired a cosmic cannonball straight past Earth. But here's the twisted: wasn't widely reported until 2014. And if it had happened just 9 days earlier, you wouldn't be reading this. Not on a screen, not on anything plugged into a wall. Because if that solar storm had hit us, the world as we know it would have taken a very literal power nap for months, maybe years. But wait, this chapter's about 2003, right? Yes, because 2003 gave us a warning shot, a warm-up act. A solar tantrum so massive it stunned scientists and briefly knocked parts of Earth sideways. It was called the Halloween storms, named for when it peaked, in late October. And while it didn't wipe us out, it did remind everyone that the sun is a hot, unpredictable beast with no respect for your cloud backups. Here's how this works. The sun doesn't just glow politely, it erupts often. Occasionally, it releases a coronal mass ejection, or CME. That's not poetic language. It's an actual term. A CME is a massive blob of charged solar plasma hurled into space at millions of miles per hour. If one of these things hits Earth head-on, it can fry satellites, melt transformers, knock out GPS, and generally make modern life curl up into a fetal position. In October and November 2003, a cluster of sunspots rotated into view and promptly exploded with a series of X-class solar flares. Think of them as the sun's loudest shout. The largest one, an X-28, was the most powerful solar flare ever recorded at the time. It temporarily blinded satellite sensors. Airline pilots on high-latitude routes reported static and navigation issues. Some spacecraft were literally thrown into safe mode because their instruments couldn't make sense of what was hitting them. And then there was Earth. Parts of Sweden lost power. Airline communications over the North Pole went down. Transformers in South Africa got cooked like, actually melted. Auroras danced down as far as Texas and Florida, painting the sky red and green in places that normally only get thunderstorms and football. The 2003 event was a glancing blow, a brush, like being clipped in the arm by a bullet meant for your chest, but it raised a terrifying question. What if it had been worse? What if a direct hit had occurred? Fast forward to 2012. That's when the real scare arrived. A CME just as powerful or even stronger was ejected from the sun. But instead of hitting Earth, it flew through our orbital path after we'd moved on. If it had occurred about 9 days earlier, Earth would have taken the full hit. And according to a study from NASA, that single event could have pushed us into a technological blackout. Power grids? Gone. Satellites? Fried. Internet? Toast. Banking, GPS, air traffic control, water treatment, hospital systems, nuclear plant safety networks, every delicate digital string tying civilization together would have snapped. And unlike a simple blackout, this one wouldn't have been fixed in hours or days. The transformers, a lone giant, custom-made, and few in number, could take months to replace. The U.S. alone might have needed 10 years to fully recover. Global panic, economic collapse. You, sitting in the dark, wondering why your phone is just a very expensive brick. The only reason it didn't happen? Luck. Pure, blind, cosmic luck. The storm was perfectly real. It just wasn't aimed at us. We don't get many of those warnings. The last one to actually hit was the Carrington event in 1859 time, when the most high-tech thing we had was the telegraph. Even then, sparks flew from wires, paper caught fire, and auroras were seen as far south as the Caribbean. Today, that kind of hit would make 2003 look like a flashlight flickering in a closet. And the sun? It's not done. It runs on cycles roughly 11 years between solar minimum and maximum. Spikes of activity come and go. We're not due for the next solar peak until around 2025, but that doesn't mean we're safe. CMEs don't follow our calendar. They just happen when they want, and they don't come with save points. So no, the 2003 solar storm didn't end the world, and the 2012 one didn't either, barely. But both of them showed us just how fragile our little system is. One well-aimed solar sneeze, and everything from your morning alarm to your country's power grid could be out for the count. Next time you check your phone or binge a show or pay for coffee with a tap, take a moment to appreciate the quiet sun, and maybe, just maybe, say thank you to the cosmic dice roll that let us dodge the last bullet. Because space doesn't have good aim. It just gets lucky. Long before civilization, before writing, before fire was more than just a lucky accident, something exploded in what is now Indonesia, and it almost took us all out with it. Not a comet, not a plague, but a volcano. A really, really big volcano. We're talking the kind of eruption that doesn't just cover the local village in a sheet messes with the entire planet's climate, permanently. Welcome to the Toba catastrophe. Roughly 0 years ago. It was loud, it was hot, and it might be the reason your family tree is a lot shorter than it should be. Toba wasn't just any volcano. It was a supervolcano. That's not a comic book term. It's the real classification for an eruption that hits the absolute top of the Volcanic Explosivity Index VEI 8. Basically, if a normal volcanic eruption is a firecracker, a supervolcano is the Big Bang's angry younger cousin. The eruption blew a crater roughly 100 kilometers wide now, filled with Lake Tobaento, the face of the Earth. Ash clouds soared over 25 miles into the stratosphere. The volume of rock and ash thrown into the sky? About 800 cubic kilometers. That's enough to bury all of modern-day New York City under 10 meters of ash. A literal geological throat punch. But the real damage wasn't just the bang, it was what happened after. All that ash didn't stay local. It blanketed South Asia in meters of gray powder. In India, scientists have found a thick layer of volcanic debris across ancient archaeological sites. Imagine waking up to find your whole world buried. Crops gone, sun blocked, rivers clogged. If you're a hunter-gatherer in 0 BC, there's no FEMA truck on the way. There's just hunger and cold. And here's the creepy part. Toba may have plunged the planet into a volcanic winter. Temperatures worldwide dropped, possibly by as much as 5 degrees Celsius, 9 degrees Celsius. That might not sound like much, but on a global scale, it's brutal. Entire ecosystems shifted. Rainfall patterns went haywire. Glaciers advanced. It was the kind of cooling that can starve a planet and shrink its populations fast. Which brings us to the bottleneck theory. Geneticists studying modern human DNA noticed something strange. For all our diversity, the human genome is surprisingly tight-knit, like we're all descended from a very small number of survivors. Some theories suggest that after the Toba eruption, the global human population may have dropped to as low as 0 individuals. That's the population of a small town. On the whole planet, whether or not it was just, Toba is still debated. Some scientists argue that climate data doesn't fully support a complete global winter, or that human migration patterns were already spread out enough to avoid a total die-off. Others think the eruption was just the final kick in the teeth during an already rough ice age. Either way, something shrank the gene pool hard around that time, and Toba's name keeps coming up in the conversation. We don't have cave paintings about it, no stone tablets describing the sky turning dark, but deep in our bones, in the few traces of ancient DNA we've managed to preserve, there's a quiet echo, a hint that once the planet flinched, and only a few of us held on. The survivors, they were lucky, or smart, or both. They might have been in parts of Africa unaffected by the worst of the fallout. They might have been coastal, able to fish while the land suffered. Whatever the case, those early humans passed on their genes. And here you are, many millennia later, reading about it on a glowing rectangle that didn't exist when the ash first fell. Supervolcanoes don't erupt often, but when they do, they change everything. Yellowstone is one. So is Campi Flegrei in Italy. They're sleeping now. But Toba reminds us that when these giants wake up, they don't just erupt, they edit history. So next time you hear someone casually mention a volcano, just know that once upon a time, one of them nearly deleted humanity like a corrupted save file. And nature didn't even blink. It was just after midnight on September 26th, 1983, and deep inside a secret Soviet bunker, the computers started screaming, red lights, sirens, a warning blinking on the consoles. The United States had launched a nuclear missile, and then another, and another. 5 total. The screen confirmed it American ICBMs were headed toward the USSR. The alarms were clear. The software was certain. Protocol dictated a swift response. Within minutes, Soviet missiles should have launched in retaliation. Full-scale nuclear war. Cities gone. Civilization over. The world turned into a smoldering memory. But instead, a man named Stanislav Petrov paused. He didn't hit the button. He didn't sound the alarm. He didn't escalate. He just waited. Petrov wasn't a high-ranking general or political figure. He was a 44-year-old duty officer, working the night shift in the Serpukhov 15 bunker facility responsible for monitoring Soviet satellite-based early warning systems. He wasn't even supposed to be on duty that night. Another officer had called in sick. And so, by pure accident, the fate of the world landed in Petrov's lap. Now, here's the thing. The warning system was new, recently installed, and Stanislav Petrov, an engineer by training, knew it hadn't been fully tested under real-world conditions. He also knew that if the United States were going to start a nuclear war, 5 missiles wouldn't make much sense. Why not launch hundreds? Thousands? Why go halfway? It didn't feel right. That's literally what he said later. I had a funny feeling in my gut. Instead of reporting the attack up the chain of command, which would have likely led to a retaliatory strike, he logged the alert as a false alarm. He told his superiors that the system was malfunctioning. He trusted his instincts over the machines. And he was right. The satellite had misinterpreted sunlight, reflecting off high-altitude clouds over Montana as missile launches. A freak alignment of atmospheric and orbital conditions had tricked the software into seeing World War III on the horizon. A glitch. That's all it was. A glitch that almost vaporized us. But it didn't, because one man underpaid, under-recognized, and utterly alone in that moment, decided to wait. He didn't get a medal. He didn't get a promotion. In fact, he was quietly reprimanded for not properly filling out the logbook that night. His act of heroism remained classified for years. It wasn't until the late 1990s that the world learned just how close we came to annihilation, and who stopped it. After the Soviet Union fell, Petrov gave a few interviews. He lived modestly in a small town outside Moscow. In one of those interviews he said, "I was just doing my job," but his voice cracked a little. The weight of that moment had never left him. The night he stood between Earth and oblivion. Imagine it. Fluorescent lights buzzing. The stale air of a bunker. The weight of Cold War paranoia pressing in on every wall. And one man, staring at a blinking red screen, saying, "No, not yet. Not today." No epic music. No slow-motion decision. Just a tired officer, a faulty satellite, and the most important gut feeling in human history. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017, quietly, without ceremony. But his story lives on because he did something extraordinary in the most ordinary way possible. He saved the world by doubting the machines. And when you think about how fragile civilization really is, how much of it depends on judgment calls, on people in rooms you'll never see, making choices you'll never hear about, remember this. Sometimes, all that stands between life and extinction is one human being who just feels something isn't right. It started with a flicker in the sky bright, strange, and way too early. On the morning of September, honest 1859, a British astronomer named Richard Carrington was doing what astronomers do, watching the sun. He sketched sunspots. He tracked solar behavior. But that day, he saw something different. A sudden, blinding flash like the sun had coughed. A white light solar flare never recorded before. He blinked. He checked his notes. The sun had burped out something big. Hours later, the Earth flinched. What Carrington witnessed was the beginning of what's now called the Carrington Event, the largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history. A solar flare had erupted from the sun's surface, and with it, a massive coronal mass ejection, or CME. Basically, a cloud of charged plasma hurled into space at millions of miles per hour. And this one was aimed right at Earth. Usually, these take a few days to reach us. This one arrived in 17 hours, which is like ordering a meteorological punch in the face and getting same-day delivery. The storm slammed into the Earth's magnetic field like a truck into a trampoline. What followed was, frankly, bizarre. Across the planet, the skies exploded in color. Auroras shimmered red, green, and purple so bright they could be seen as far south as the Caribbean. In the Rocky Mountains, miners woke up in the middle of the night thinking it was morning. People in cities read newspapers outdoors at midnight without a lantern. The northern lights had gone full disco mode, and the planet was just along for the ride. But the real chaos was technological. Telegraph systems, the 19th century's pride and joy, went absolutely haywire. Operators reported electric shocks from their equipment. Sparks flew from telegraph keys. In some cases, the systems burst into flames. Messages were sent even after power supplies were disconnected. The auroral current was so strong, it temporarily turned the Earth itself into a giant battery. That's right. The storm turned our planet into an accidental power grid, which was cool, in a terrifying way. But here's where it gets sobering. The world of 1859 ran on paper and wires. The most advanced technologies were steam engines and Morse code. And still, the Carrington event melted stuff. Now imagine if it happened today. Satellites would be fried. GPS? Gone. Communication networks, aviation systems, power grids, they'd all collapse. A storm of that magnitude would knock out transformers, disable spacecraft, and potentially cause cascading blackouts across continents. Some experts believe it would take years and trillions of dollars to recover. We actually got a preview of this in 1989. A smaller solar storm knocked out power across Quebec, leaving millions in the dark. In 2003, another one disrupted satellites and grounded flights. And in 2012, a Carrington-level storm missed Earth by about 9 days. Just a near miss from deep space. We didn't even see it coming. The sun is still doing its thing, cycling through periods of calm and chaos every 11 years or so. During solar maximum, the odds of a big CME rise. And yet, most people have never heard of Carrington. There's no blockbuster movie, no monument, just a few dusty observatory logs, and one guy's shaky sketch of a solar flare. But that sketch changed how we think about space weather. It taught us that the sun, distant and glowing and seemingly steady, can lose its temper without warning. And when it does, it reaches across 93 million miles to slap the Earth directly in the circuits. So, the next time you open TikTok, or ask Alexa about the weather, or check your car's GPS for directions to brunch, remember, all of it, the wires, the satellites, the techies built on the assumption that the sun stays polite. And the Carrington event was the day it didn't. It crept in on the backs of rats and the breath of strangers. It sailed into harbors in wooden ships, tucked beneath barrels of grain and behind sacks of spices. The year was 1347, and Europe had no idea it was about to get absolutely wrecked by a disease that would make every future plague seem like a head cold. The Black Death, as we now call it, wasn't just a pandemic. It was a reset button. A continent-wide horror show that killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people in just 4 years, roughly 1/3 of Europe's population. In some cities, it was more than half. Entire villages vanished. Fields went unharvested. Graves overflowed. For most of the population, death didn't arrive quietly. It came coughing and bleeding and fast. It likely began in Central Asia, possibly Mongolia, where the bacterium, Yersinia pestis, hitched a ride on fleas, who hitched rides on rats, who hitched rides on ships bound for Europe. Once it reached the ports of the Mediterranean especially, Messina, Genoa, and Marseillais moved inland like wildfire. But unlike fire, it left the buildings, just not the people. There were 3 forms of the disease. Bubonic plague, the most classic version, caused massive swollen lymph nodes called bubostender, blackened lumps in the groin, armpits, and neck. It killed most within a week. Septicemic plague was worse, it infected the bloodstream and often killed in a day. Pneumonic plague? That one infected your lungs and made you cough it onto your friends and neighbors like a medieval biological weapon. And medicine? Medicine in the 14th century was, let's say, ambitious. Treatments included bloodletting, leeches, crushed emeralds, and aromatic herbs stuffed into bird masks. That's where the famous plague doctor look comes from, those creepy, beaked figures in long leather coats. The beaks were stuffed with lavender, rose petals, and cloves, meant to purify the air. The doctors looked like the Grim Reaper's more theatrical cousin, and the results were about as effective. People tried everything. Some believed the plague was caused by bad air, so they burned incense or carried sweet-smelling pomanders. Others blamed Jews, outsiders, witches, or planetary alignments. Flagellants roamed from town to town whipping themselves, hoping that self-punishment might appease an angry god. Meanwhile, the rats just kept scurrying. Cities emptied. The economy collapsed. Laborers became scarce, which gave surviving peasants more bargaining power, oddly helping to destabilize feudalism. Land was abandoned. Art and literature turned dark and apocalyptic. Skeletons danced on church walls. The concept of memento mori, remember, you will die, became a lifestyle. It was one of history's first truly global pandemics, spreading not just through Europe, but also the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia. And despite its scale, it didn't stop in 1351. The plague came back again, and again, recurring in waves for centuries, each time stirring that same old cocktail of panic, superstition, and mass mortality. But the first wave? That one broke the world. And here's the strangest part: it ended not with a cure, but just by fading. The disease burned through the population until there simply weren't enough hosts left. Cities slowly reopened. Fields regrew. Survivors married fast and rebuilt families. And life, as it always does, limped forward. Today, Yersinia pestis still exists. It lives in animal populations in parts of the western United States, Asia, and Africa. We have antibiotics now, and outbreaks are rare and treatable. But every time someone digs up a mass grave in England or opens a crypt in France and finds blackened bones, the story comes back. A world on fire, ruled by fear, and reshaped by a tiny bacterium with a taste for chaos. No, the Black Death didn't end the world, but it showed us just how fast the wheels can come off and how long it takes to put them back on. The problem started with a shortcut. In the early days of computer programming, storage space was expensive, and every byte mattered. So instead of writing out the full year like 1,982 or 1,975, programmers just used the last two digits, 82, 75. Clean, efficient. A tiny decision made in the dusty glow of 1,970's computer labs. Nobody thought about the future. Or more accurately, they didn't think 2000 would ever get here. Because when you're coding for a banking system in 1973, the year 2000 feels like the Jetsons. Flying cars, moon vacations, whatever. Someone else's problem. Then the year 2000 started to get closer, and someone realized, wait, if the computer thinks it's 99 and then it becomes 0, it might assume it's 1,900. Not 2,000. That's bad. And by bad, we mean global digital catastrophe. Banks wouldn't know what year it was. Payroll systems could crash. Hospital equipment might malfunction. Utility grids, traffic lights, credit cards, all of it was potentially built on faulty assumptions. Insurance policies could expire 100 years early. Interest rates could go negative. Some systems might think babies were 100 years old and pensioners were newborns. And worst of all, what if air traffic control software thought time itself had reversed? Thus, the Y2K bug was born, a quiet little glitch that turned into a late 90s panic spiral. People stocked up on water and canned food. Survival bunkers sold out. tech firms hired programmers by the thousands to comb through ancient code like digital archaeologists, and every news station in the world covered it like the countdown to a digital apocalypse. Governments got involved. Massive budgets were allocated to Y2K compliance. IT departments ran test after test. Corporations updated systems they hadn't touched in decades. Some places even switched to manual processes just in case. There were predictions of power outages, collapsed stock markets, planes grounded mid-flight, and nuclear plants defaulting into chaos mode. As December 31, 1999 approached, the world collectively held its breath. New Year's Eve parties turned into watch parties for the end of the modern world. Midnight struck first in New Zealand. Everyone waited. Nothing happened. Then Australia. Nothing. Japan. Still nothing. The wave of silence followed midnight around the globe like a whisper of relief. By the time the clock rolled over in New York, the world exhaled. Systems held. Planes stayed in the sky. ATMs still gave out money. The lights stayed on. Humanity had done it. We'd survived the digital doomsday. But was it overblown? Yes. And also, no. It's true that the actual night of Y2K passed with barely a blip, but that's because of the massive, borderline obsessive amount of preparation. Programmers fixed billions of lines of code over the course of years. Some systems were completely replaced. In the US alone, over 100 billion was spent fixing it. Globally, it was closer to 300 billion. So when the lights stayed on, it wasn't because the threat was fake, it was because people actually did the work. Still, a lot of folks were disappointed. The preppers with their basements full of rice and ammunition, the conspiracy theorists, the guy who dumped his life savings into gold and built a cabin in the woods. They woke up on January 2000 to find the sun still shining, the water still flowing, and the same Monday bills waiting on the table. But deep down, Y2K wasn't just about broken code. It was about realizing how dependent we'd become on machines we barely understood. It was about facing the fact that the whole modern world was built on invisible agreements between lines of numbers written by people who may have retired, or died, or moved on long ago. We're still vulnerable to that kind of fragility. Not from date fields, maybe, but from other assumptions, other shortcuts, other digital ghosts waiting in the system. So no, the world didn't end on January 2000. But for a few years, we got a very good look at how easy it would be for a couple of digits to knock everything over. Just a 2-character mistake, and the planet flinched. It was a Thursday in July 2019 when astronomers looked up and collectively said, "Wait, what's that?" It turned out to be an asteroid roughly the size of a football field zipping past Earth at a speed of 15 miles per second. That's 55 miles per hour, or fast enough to go from New York to London in under 5 minutes, assuming you weren't reduced to vapor by entering the atmosphere. The asteroid was officially called 2019 OK, which is a hilariously chill name for something that almost ruined everyone's summer. The kicker? We didn't even see it coming until about 24 hours beforehand. That's right. A space rock, big enough to flatten a city, flew between Earth and the Moon, and we barely noticed until it was already waving at our satellites. To be clear, if 2019 OK had hit us, it wouldn't have been a global extinction event more, like a really bad day for a few million people. Think regional disaster, instant crater, atmospheric shockwaves, flattened infrastructure, no Wi-Fi, definitely trending on Twitter, but in a very short-lived, fire and smoke kind of way. And it's not the only one. Back in 2004, astronomers discovered another asteroid, this one named Apophis, which, fun fact, is also the name of an Egyptian god of chaos. Solid branding. At first, calculations showed a 2.7% chance it would strike Earth in 2029. That might sound small, but in orbital mechanics, that's a red alert. Scientists couldn't look away. For a while, it looked like Apophis might thread the cosmic needle and slam into Earth on Friday, April 13th, 2029. Yes, it would have hit us on Friday the 13th. You can't make this up. Eventually, more refined data ruled out a 2029 impact, but only just. Apophis will pass closer to Earth than some of our satellites. That's right. Closer than the weather satellite that tells you when it's going to rain. We'll actually be able to see it with the naked eye as it sails past, assuming you're not panicking in a bunker just in case the math was wrong. But wait, there's more. In 2013, a 66-foot wide asteroid exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia. It didn't even hit the ground, just detonated in the atmosphere. The shockwave shattered thousands of windows and sent over 10 people to the hospital. All that damage, and it wasn't even a big one. It snuck in from the sun's blind spot, which is, comforting. And then there's 2008 TC3, a tiny space rock that actually did hit Earth, but it was small enough to burn up in the atmosphere over Sudan. Scientists managed to predict that one just before impact, which was a huge win for asteroid tracking. But still, imagine hearing that an asteroid is headed your way, and knowing there's absolutely nothing you can do about it except hope it's small. Earth, as it turns out, is really good at cosmic dodgeball. We're hit constantly by tiny debris dust, pebbles, stuff that makes shooting stars. But once in a while, a real bruiser comes barreling in, and every now and then, it misses by a cosmic whisker. We don't have a planetary defense system yet. No Bruce Willis oil drill team. No laser satellites. Just telescopes, spreadsheets, and the hope that gravity keeps playing nice. NASA's DART Missiona small spacecraft that literally body-checked an asteroid's moon in 2022 was our first experimental move to test asteroid deflection. It worked, sort of. But it was a test on a rock that wasn't even a threat. The scary truth is, if something big were coming at us and we didn't have at least a few years' notice, we'd be out of options. You can't nudge a mountain out of the way if you don't even see it coming. And we're still blind to many of themes, especially the ones that approach from the direction of the sun, where our telescopes can't see. So yes, the asteroid of 2019 missed. So did the one in 2004, and the one coming in 2029 will almost definitely miss too. Almost. Until then, we just keep looking up, keep watching the skies, and keep quietly crossing our fingers that Earth stays lucky a little bit longer. Because in space, there are no second chances, just big rocks and small margins. In April of 1815, the Earth let out a noise so loud it could be heard 600 miles away. Not metaphorically, literally, heard across an ocean's worth of distance. People thought it was cannon fire. Naval ships changed course to investigate. But it wasn't war. It was Mount Tambora. This Indonesian volcano didn't just erupt, it obliterated itself. It blew apart with a force estimated to be over 100 times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The top of the mountain, more than 40 feet, was vaporized. The eruption launched more than 36 cubic miles of ash, rock, and debris into the sky. And that sky? It didn't recover for a long time. Tambora wasn't just the most violent volcanic eruption in recorded history. It was a climate-altering, crop-killing, ghost story-birthing global event. It didn't just take out its surrounding landscape. It shadowed the planet. The immediate destruction was horrific. Tens of thousands died in Indonesia alone, if not directly from the explosion. Then from tsunamis, ashfall, or famine. Ash buried entire villages. Ships at sea were blanketed in darkness. The sound circled the globe multiple times. But the real chaos came after. When a volcano erupts with enough force, it can inject sulfur dioxide high into the stratosphere, where it mixes with water to form a veil of reflective aerosols. These aerosols don't fall quickly. They linger, scattering sunlight and dimming the planet like someone turned down the brightness on Earth itself. By 1816, the weather stopped behaving. That year would become known as the year without a summer. Across North America and Europe, temperatures dropped. Crops failed. Snow fell in June. Frost hit in July. Rivers froze in August. People wore coats indoors and tried to cook in fireless hearths. It was summer, with the soul sucked out of it gray, grim, and unrelenting. In New England, farmers watched their entire growing season vanish. In Ireland and Germany, food shortages turned into outright famine. There were riots in the streets, grain stores looted, horses eaten. In Switzerland, the sky was so perpetually overcast that a group of travelers holed up in a lakeside villa passed the time writing ghost stories to match the mood. One of them, a teenager named Mary Shelley, dreamed of a reanimated corpse and created Frankenstein. Thanks, volcano. The death toll is still debated, but estimates range into the hundreds of thousands worldwide, most of them from starvation and disease triggered by crop failure and climate shock. Tambora didn't just erupt. It reached through time and rewrote history. And while the world eventually warmed again, the lessons stuck around. It was a brutal reminder of how interconnected everything is. One mountain in Indonesia sneezes and Europe shivers. One geologic event, and the balance of human civilization gets shoved off its axis. We've seen big eruptions since Krakatoa in 1883, Pinatubo in 1991, but none quite like Tambora. It stands alone at the top of the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a monument to Earth's capacity for drama. And it's worth remembering that the planet still has a few supervolcanoes quietly simmering beneath the surface. Tambora gave us a year with no summer, a literary monster, and a warning in ash. Everything, even the weather, can be undone by a single moment of pressure too high, heat too deep, and timing too perfect. All it takes is one mountain to cough. It sounds like the kind of thing a 1980s thriller writer would make up after too many espressos. A hidden system buried deep beneath the Ural Mountains, designed not to prevent nuclear war but to guarantee it. A machine with no feelings, no hesitation, and no off switch. Welcome to the Dead Hand. Its official name was Perimeter. But to Western analysts, and anyone who values not glowing in the dark, it's better known as the Dead Handa last resort doomsday device, created by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, in case things got really catastrophically out of hand. Which, to be fair, was sort of the Cold War's entire brand. Here's the premise. What if the United States launched a surprise nuclear strike, wiping out the Soviet leadership in one blow? No time to hit the red button, no generals left to give the order. Game over. So the Soviets built something darker, a system that would watch and listen. And if it decided based on seismic activity, radiation spikes, radio silence, and some very spooky algorithms that the USSR had been nuked beyond salvation, it would fire back, automatically. Without asking anyone, it was the nuclear equivalent of a vengeful ghost rigged to throw a punch even after it's dead. The idea behind it was cold logic, deterrence. Mutual assured destruction, or MAD, only works if both sides know they can hit back. But what if your whole command chain's gone in the first wave? That's where Dead Hand stepped in, a way to guarantee retaliation even if the entire country had gone silent. You launch at us? Fine. We'll make sure somebody launches back. So how did it work? Deep in a bunker, the system remained on standby, usually turned off, but able to be activated in times of extreme tension. Once activated, it would begin monitoring specific conditions. Was there a nuclear explosion? Were high-level command lines silent? Had Moscow ceased communication? If all the boxes were ticked, Dead Hand would wake up. And then a missile, just one, would launch, but not at a target. Instead, it would arc high over Soviet territory, broadcasting coded launch orders to missile silos and submarines across the country. Within minutes, the full nuclear arsenal would be airborne. The Soviet response would be unleashed even if not a single living soul had survived to give the okay. It was the ultimate revenge plan, terrifyingly efficient, pure automation in the service of global annihilation. What's even creepier? It might still exist. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Details about Dead Hand trickled out through interviews with retired officials and defectors. Some said the system had been dismantled. Others claimed it had simply been updated and renamed. Russia, unsurprisingly, plays coy. In 2009, a Russian general casually mentioned in an interview that perimeter still existed and was fully operational. Then he smiled. Cool, very reassuring. Unlike the flashy nuclear briefcases and dramatic red buttons you see in movies, the real fear with systems like Dead Hand is their silence. They're not about drama. They're about inevitability. No last-minute hero, no stand-down call, just a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. Interpret the end of the world as a green light. And yes, the United States has its own complex system of redundancies. But it doesn't have this. Not a standalone machine built to avenge a country that may no longer exist. That's a uniquely Soviet flavor of paranoia meets technology, equal parts terrifying and elegant in a monstrous way. Today, the world still has thousands of nuclear weapons, still has launch protocols, still has humans staring at radar screens in the middle of the night. But somewhere there's still a bunker, still a system on standby, still a signal waiting for silence. Because Dead Hand was never about peace. It was about promise. A dark machine-enforced promise that even in death, someone or something would get the last word. 66 million years ago, Earth had a bad day. A really, really bad day. At the time, the planet was lush, full of towering trees, warm oceans, and dinosaurs basically running the show. There were no cities, no people, no worrying about taxes or cell service. Just thunder lizards, doing thunder lizard things until, from the cold silence of space, came a rock the size of a small mountain, moving faster than anything they could comprehend. It didn't come quietly. This was no ordinary space pebble. It was 6 miles wide and traveling at more than 40 miles per hour. Scientists call it the Chicxulub impactor, named after the region in Mexico where its crater still yawns beneath the surface of the Yucatan Peninsula. When it hit, it didn't just make a splash, it punched straight through the Earth's crust like a hot knife through prehistoric butter. The initial impact was like every disaster movie cranked up to 11. The asteroid released energy equivalent to about 100 trillion tons of TNT. That's over 1 billion times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Everything near the impact site was instantly vaporized. The surrounding rock liquefied. A crater nearly 100 miles wide and 20 miles deep was carved into the Earth in seconds. But the real extinction didn't come from the impact. It came from the aftermath. The force of the collision threw molten rock, ash, and dust high into the atmosphere. Some of it re-entered Earth's skies, like thousands of shooting stars, igniting global firestorms. Forests burned, oceans boiled at the surface. Creatures that weren't obliterated on impact faced a new, slower death sentence. Because the dust and sulfur blocked out the sun. For months, possibly years, the planet was plunged into darkness. Photosynthesis stopped. Plants died. Then the herbivores. Then the carnivores. Temperatures plummeted. Acid rain fell. The food chain collapsed like a house of cards during a hurricane. In the fossil record, it shows up as a thin literally, a thin dark band of clay called the Cretaceous Paleogene, KPG boundary, found all over the world. That line contains high levels of iridium, a rare metal on Earth but common in asteroids. It's like a planetary signature, a cosmic receipt left behind by the object that wrecked an entire era. And yet, not everything died. Birds, distant cousins of dinosaurs, somehow survived. So did small mammals, burrowers, and anything lucky enough to stay out of the way and eat whatever was left. They became the new inheritors of the Earth, and eventually, they evolved into you. But here's the part that messes with your head. This wasn't a freak accident. There are lots of space rocks out there. The asteroid belt alone contains millions of objects. Near-Earth objects, NEOs, pass by us all the time. Most miss. Some come really close. The one that hit 66 million years ago? We didn't have telescopes to see it. No defense systems. No warning. If it happened again, we'd maybe have a few days. Weeks if we're lucky. Months if it's polite. NASA and other space agencies do track asteroids now. They're watching. But even today, we're still in the early days of planetary defense. We've got plans push it with a spacecraft, paint it white so sunlight nudges it off course, maybe even blow it up, but nothing that's been truly tested against something that size. So yeah, one rock, one bad day. Dinosaurs never saw it coming. And honestly, neither would we. It was 8:07 a.m. on a quiet Saturday morning in Hawaii, January 13th, 2018, when thousands of cell phones across the islands lit up with a message that no one is ever prepared to see. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. No typos, no vague phrasing. It was clear, it was terrifying, and it was blasted to everyone at once through the official emergency alert system. Phones buzzed, TVs beeped, sirens wailed. And for 38 surreal minutes, over 1 million people genuinely believed the world was ending. The threat wasn't abstract. Tensions between the US and North Korea had been rising for months. Missile tests, rhetoric, real fear. So when the alert hit, people assumed the worst had come. That a nuclear missile was already on its way, skimming over the Pacific, unstoppable, minutes from impact. Reactions ranged from practical to poetic to absurd. Some dove into bathtubs with mattresses over their heads. Some herded their children into storm drains. Others froze in place, eyes glued to the sky. Tourists ran into hotel basements. A few couples got engaged. People cried. People called their parents. People prayed. And then there were the pancake people. At diners across the islands, some folks just kept eating. Maybe they didn't see the alert. Maybe they didn't believe it. Or maybe they figured, if this is the end, I'm going out with syrup. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, emergency management staff were panicking for very different reasons. There was no missile. There never was. The alert had been sent in error-triggered during a shift change by an employee who selected the wrong option from a drop-down menu. Instead of clicking Test Alert, he clicked the real one. Then, to make things worse, the system asked him to confirm, and he did. Because, he said later, he thought, it was real. No one caught the mistake immediately. The system wasn't built with a simple unsend button. It wasn't like tweeting a bad take. Once the warning went out, it just stayed out. For 38 full minutes. Eventually, a correction was issued. Phones buzzed again. There is no missile threat or danger to the state of Hawaii. Repeat. False alarm. Relief spread like a wave, but so did rage. How could this happen? Why wasn't there a failsafe? Who built a system where the fate of public panic hinged on 2 clicks? The fallout wasn't nuclear, but it was messy. The employee who sent the alert was let go. Protocols were overhauled. The governor of Hawaii admitted it took him 17 minutes to tweet the correction because he forgot his Twitter password. You can't make that up. What this whole incident revealed beyond the quirks of digital bureaucracies, how fragile that line between ordinary and apocalyptic really is. One message, one mistake, and suddenly, everyone is forced to look their mortality in the face before breakfast. Some panicked, some froze, some held their kids, some poured more coffee. But for a little while, everyone lived in that strange existential pause between certainty and oblivion. And for better or worse, when the end didn't come, people had stories about fear, about love, about pancakes. In the spring of 1910, the world looked up and collectively freaked out. Halley's Comet was coming. Not just visible, not just pretty, but on a trajectory that would send Earth right through its tail. For astronomers, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For the public, it was an open invitation to imagine the most dramatic sci-fi doom possible. Here's what actually happened. Halley's Comet, which swings by every 75 to 76 years, was returning for its 1910 visit. This wasn't its first rodeo, but this time, thanks to improved telescopes and growing public awareness, People were ready for it, sort of. The comet became visible to the naked eye in April, and newspapers began covering it like a celestial celebrity. It was bright, dramatic, and streaked across the sky like a burning dagger. But then came the twist. Astronomers announced that on May 19th, Earth would pass through the comet's tail. Cue the existential crisis. Now, comets are mostly made of dust, ice, and gas. Their tails can stretch millions of miles across space. And while incredibly thin so sparse, they wouldn't even fog your glasses. The idea of a giant cosmic exhaust pipe brushing against Earth triggered all kinds of imaginative panic. To make things worse, scientists had recently discovered that comet tails contain cyanogen, a cyanide-related compound. It's harmless in the concentrations involved, but this detail got snatched up and mangled by sensationalist headlines. One French astronomer casually noted the compound's presence, and newspapers ran with it. The result? "Comet may wipe out all life," screamed one American headline. "Cyanide gas. In the sky. World doomed," said another. Snake oil salesmen rejoiced. Suddenly, everyone and their uncle was selling comet-proof tonics, anti-comet pills, and gas masks, actual gas masks, for a gas that wasn't even remotely dangerous in spacetail form. Some people sealed their windows with wet towels. Others partied like the end was guaranteed. One man in Texas reportedly built an airtight vault for his family, packed with canned food and holy water. It leaked. Religious groups split down the middle. Some preached that the comet was a sign of divine wrath, urging repentance. Others saw it as confirmation of prophecy, a celestial blessing. Meanwhile, scientists tried in vain to calm everyone down. They explained how diffuse the tail was, how Earth passed through comet tails all the time, just not this visibly, but the damage was done. When you combine new science, old superstitions, and a dash of media chaos, you get people buying gas masks to survive outer space farts. And then, the big day arrived. People gathered in parks, rooftops, and town squares. Some watched quietly, others held signs. A few danced. The comet hung in the sky, otherworldly and unbothered. The Earth drifted through its tail for 6 full hours, and absolutely nothing happened. No one died from comet gas. No birds fell from the sky. The air didn't smell weird. The sun came up the next morning like it always did. The newspapers quickly pivoted back to politics and prize fights. The gas masks ended up in closets and attics. But the moment stayed, a strange, beautiful panic that united the world in cosmic awe and collective irrationality. For a brief time, in 1910, humans remembered that we're passengers on a rock flying through space, and that sometimes that space contains mysterious glowing things that don't care what we think. And while the next appearance of Halley's Comet in 1986 was met with more curiosity than panic, that 1910 flyby remains a perfect snapshot of what happens when science, imagination, and good old-fashioned fear collide. We looked up, we panicked, and then we moved on. Because, as it turns out, Earth is remarkably good at not dying. At least, not that day.